Yes, hello, and I'll just start by now. Hopefully, some of you will join. But since I'm also taping to be able to upload on our Facebook page, I will simply go ahead. First of all, hello. As you see, I am here in what is my studio normally. It is a studio in which I use to tape things. Maybe I should show you a little bit. As you can see, there's a green screen. And so it's a studio that I use for a TV I used to run. And just to be able to work. I see there is one person that's very good. Uh, Hopefully, we'll get used along the way to working with this setting. I just want to make sure that everything is already organized. Um, there's a live chat there. Normally, it should be possible for you to say something. Let me use it a little bit for us to be able to converse when we have a class. Hello, let me write that. You can participate here, ask questions, contribute, comment, etc. Okay, so there we go. So it means if you want to ask anything, that is where you can participate, and therefore we'll have the normal setting of a class without being in front of each other. So having said that, I am just noticing that President Bernstein sent a note, confirming that all our classes are going to be remote, which is already happening. So I wanted to test the setting today to see that it works. So what I thought is that we'll be working on two fronts. We'll be using YouTube, but at the same time, Blackboard, because I have some material on Blackboard, some visual material, not only the textual material, but also the visual material for us to be able to give some substance to what we are talking about. So obviously the text is, you should have read the text before we have the session. Otherwise, it will not make that much sense. So it is better you read it before, and then we will not have to go over that again. During the session of Monday, some of you say that it will not be a good idea to pile up texts upon texts, which I find is important to underline, and I'm not going to do that. So what I'll do is that the class is going to run as usual, which is a mixture of my own analysis. Clearly, that is why we have a standing class and visual material for you to be able to have a visualized representation of the concepts that I am addressing. So that is why Blackboard is important. So therefore, if you go on Blackboard, each time for the class, you'll have the day and the visual material that I'm going to be using for our session. The visual material could have been included. I could have edited it on my computer here for you to be able to follow me using the visuality at the same time. Maybe along the way we'll do that. We'll see how it works. But for now, I felt that it may be simply important to have that material at your disposal on Blackboard, because my editor, I have a couple of editors, but they, I don't want to busy them with things that are related to our class, because I use them in general for my private purposes, for my public purposes, and not for class issues. So I see there are two people already, which is very good. And, our class is made of 50 people. So I hope next time to have at least all of you, tune in. I was saying that one idea would have been to make it possible for you to, for me at least, to talk while, those elements are running. Therefore, I will have needed an editor, or there are some TV programmings that do it very easily, etc., etc. But because I am trying to use the facility of Blackboard, I will not be doing the simultaneous editing, for us to be able to follow each other. So what we'll do for the moment, except if you contradict me there, therefore I'll have to change the procedure, will be that I'll upload the material I find important on Blackboard, and with the title that is that we'll be talking about. And of course, at first we'll have the text. I hope you will have read the text before, and because we don't analyze the text in class, you're supposed to have read it before at home and to have written a short summary for me to make sure that we are at the same level of discussion, of interaction. So then, we'll go over some of the visuals and some of the thematic issues I find are important and will have to be addressed. So that is how I feel the conversation can run. As you can see, all of us are used to, conversation on live chat. So live chat is there for that. With YouTube, it's very easy. You write you say something, and I'll read what you say, and I'll address it, and we'll continue along those lines. I preferred YouTube because, first of all, I'm used to it. But the other thing is that our Blackboard doesn't have a feature that will have made it possible. Yesterday, I was thinking of using WebEx, which is also a possibility, but I looked into it and they don't allow recordings, which YouTube does. Our university, chooses has WebEx, but I'm not used to it. Yesterday, I looked into it and I think it doesn't have the capacity that we need, or at least that I need. Having said that, I am welcoming you again, and I'm very, apologetic because it is not the way I had hoped to run the class. But during these last 2 years, I've been running a TV station anyway, so I'm used to doing that already, and it doesn't bother me that much. It is a format that I use in this studio all along, and I'm used to doing that. So it is totally okay. It's totally okay. We'll get used to doing that. And for any of you who will work tomorrow in a company, you know yourself that that's the way conversation happens in large corporations. So having teaching done like this is something that one will have to be used to anyway. So today, I wanted us to address the issue of black spectatorship. There is that text, Negroes laughing at themselves. I asked you to read, and if I did not do that, I didn't have the time to, check into responses, etc., etc. I would like you to read the text, and I'm going to assign you. I'm going to give an assignment asking you to write a small summary of the text if you haven't done it so far. That is something that you have to do as a response. I'm going to do it today, and I'm going to also give you the topics for the midterm exam. We are dealing with so many things that I do not want to put too much on the table. Most of the things we are dealing with are organizational, are procedural, and so therefore I do not want to bother you with content-based requests, particularly regarding midterm. But I'm going to do it today, and you have all the time necessary to write it. In general, it's 1 week until the end of the break. So you write it and you send it to me. So that is something that I'm going to be doing. But just remember that I expect you to write a short summary of these texts, text on spectatorship, and to send it to me for me to know that all of you actually read the material, and also for me to know that all of you are at the on the same page, So the spectator is really important to be addressed because it is, it's the cornerstone of the customer. It is the cornerstone of the popular. It is the cornerstone of capitalism. Spectator will have us go back first of all to that figure, to that character, which we which I talked about at a certain moment, a couple of weeks ago, which is the flaneur. The flaneur. Let me write it here. The flaneur, and you remember we addressed the issue of the flaneur when talking about capitalism in general, but when uh, creating a certain distinction with the character of the slave, of the slave ship. So we're talking about the flaneur as being that subject, a subject that appears in the middle of the market, in the middle of the mall, and a character that was introduced in philosophy as being the cornerstone of modernity. So capitalism is, of course, the the backbone of modernity. So the flaneur is a character of the 19th century, a character that comes into philosophy as the epitome of modernity. And in during the session when we were talking about it, before talking about the plantation, etc., about rubber, before talking about all that, when we were talking about the flaneur, we noticed that the flaneur, in its appearance in philosophy, in Western philosophy, is a white character. Is racialized, is raced, as one would say. So therefore, the flaneur is not innocent because the flaneur is somebody who walks around, who does things, who doesn't particularly have a purpose, and it is somebody who, in essence, is free as opposed to the slave from the slave ship, who is not free. So the flaneur is free. The flaneur is the origin of the customer. He can buy things. And of course, the slave is a commodity, is somebody who was sold. So the distinction between the flaneur and the slave, therefore, is a distinction between freedom and unfreedom, between oppression and servitude. Even though the flaneur appears to be somebody who is careless, somebody who simply spends, somebody who has money, somebody who is, in the middle of some of the megapoles of the West, Paris, London, New York, Chicago, etc. So somebody who, in essence, rules the world. The appearance of the flaneur during the large commercial exhibitions, colonial exhibitions of the 19th century, of the beginning of the 20th century, is a mark of the fact that the flaneur is a consumer because he's there and is in general he, even though the 19th century also has the character of the wife working with the husband on streets and looking at things, buying particularly during the weekend, meandering, as one will say, right? So there is a picture on Blackboard. I uploaded it, and you can see it's a picture of 1842, where you see the flaneur. He's smoking, he's walking around, and it was before the invention of cars. So you have the flaneur who is simply happy there and spending times, and buying and consuming. That's the consumer at its very origin, at the heart of capitalism. So what I would like us to remember there is, of course, that the flaneur excludes blackness because blackness is at that particular moment under servitude. Blackness is at that particular moment a subject that doesn't have any freedom. We are not going to go back to Equano, etc., etc. But also, the flaneur is an accomplice of colonialism because 19th century, we talked about it, is the century of colonialism. It is 1882, that is when Africa was subjugated. That is where the partition of Africa happened. So the scripture, the definition of a flaneur in 1842 as a character of modernity comes at the same time when Africa is colonized. And we don't need to argue a lot about it. It is clear that industrialization, the Industrial Revolution comes at the same time when the African continent is colonized. You walk through those concepts when you were addressing, colonialism, the heart of darkness, and its relation to Firestone, the complexity of colonialism, but also its complicity with consumer culture, and the flaneur is at the heart of consumer culture. So, if just to recapitulate a little bit, if there is a structural opposition between the flaneur and the slave, there is a complicity between the flaneur and colonialism. So if there is a certain opposition, if you want, between the flaneur and the unfree person who is on the boat, because the flaneur is free and the slave is not free. There is a clear complicity between the flaneur and colonialism, and that one I hope has been established in your analysis of Firestone. And I saw your comment, I saw your your work. I saw what you did, simply to underline the fact that the flounder appears in a nexus, inside a nexus in which companies, private companies certainly are very important, but also the state. So we are not going to come back to the four party, to the four systems of colonialism that we addressed in class. It is not necessary because we had a session on that. But what you will have to remember is that the flaneur is not a character that is innocent. It is a character that's complicit of colonialism. And even if on pictures like the one by Gavani, you see somebody who is enjoying life, somebody who obviously is free, he's looking up there, he's enjoying the sun, and he has his hands in his pocket. So he's carefree. One will say it is somebody who doesn't have that much issues. That is somebody who's an accomplice of colonialism. So it is somebody who is actually part of the machine of colonialism and of oppression. It is somebody who in the south of the US was called a gentleman. And gentleman meaning of course, the slave owner, etc., etc. So the freedom of the slave owner is brought at the expense of the incarceration of the slave, certainly, and of the colonialism of the African continent. Why am I addressing all that? I'm addressing all that not only as an introduction, but also for us to remember that that when we talk about the Black Atlantic, it is not only water, etc., etc. It is a relationship between the smallest entity and the large universe. So they are everything being connected. It is essential for us to see how those things are connected. So, in other words, it's not simply our task to say everything is connected. It is important for us to be able to see how everything is connected, how things are embedded in each other, and how they relate with each other. So that is why I address those things for us when we look at the flaneur, to be able to trace the relation between, on the one hand, the flaneur and its distinction, structural distinction with the slave, and on the other hand, its complicity with with colonialism. And of course, one can go back to slavery to even see that relationship. So talking about the popular, forces us, calls us, begs us actually to have a consciousness of its relation to all those systems of oppression. But now, what is the position of blackness there? Of course, I say it as a commodity. That is number one. So the flaneur buys things and also buys people. So the consequence of that is that the appearance of blackness inside a system in which the flaneur is free, is such that blackness is related to being dominated, clearly. But I would rather say for today, because we are moving forward, we are not going to repeat the classes we had already. Because we are moving forward, I would rather say that blackness appears in a position of spectatorship. Blackness appears in a position of spectatorship. So, in other words, if the flaneur has agency, if the flaneur can go around, buy things, and enjoy the sun, etc., etc., blackness, on the contrary, cannot do that. As a consequence, blackness is observing. Blackness is framed as spectator in a world in which things happen. So that is, the most important aspect for us, where that one can be underlined, is of course cinema. So of course cinema, because cinema is not only part of public culture, it's not only part of pop culture, it is also an institution in which power relations are mostly defined through an interaction between the spectator and the producer. So if the flaneur is the producer in that constellation, or is related, is an accomplice of the systems of production. So the blacks, the black character in that particular constellation is the spectator. So the article I asked you to read talks about that, presents how blackness is framed as the spectator in American cinema and in Hollywood. They said particularly, or in the tradition of American cinema. So the session of today has as its goal to show how blackness appears and is structured as a spectator. What the text you read did was to use a couple of films and to use a couple of novels to verbalize that, to verbalize the fact that blackness appears as a spectator of capitalism. I said before, a commodity. A commodity is a thing, is something that one can buy, and now as a spectator. So one can extrapolate and go further, but in this particular session, I'd like us to see as a spectator, right? So the appearing as a spectator has a couple of consequences, and I'd like us to go over some of them. When one talks about spectatorship in cinema, there are a couple of ramifications, and I think the English language is actually very good. It's a good tool to address that. Because of course there is a distinction between a spectator and a viewer. A spectator is random. You can walk on the street and you look at things, you enjoy them. You are a spectator. But a viewer is somebody who, of course, has an agency already, who knows what to view. So it is somebody who is particularly so who has agency, and that will be the distinction between a spectator and a viewer. So casting blacks as spectators excludes them as viewers. So basically, they are removed from a system in which they will have expressed their agency. The agency being categorized, being defined in what one will call viewership. Right? Viewership, it can be quantified, it can be qualified. As you well know, it is, you have a sociology of viewership that can be very much analyzed. But as far as blackness is concerned, it is important for the time that one is talking about, is the turn of the 20th century. Blackness are seen as spectators because they don't have access to the systems of production of cinema. So they're excluded from Hollywood, in other words. So because blacks are excluded from the system of production of films, they become spectators, consumers of those films. So when one talks about pop culture, about popular culture, etc., particularly in the West, it is important to see that difference, that structurally blacks have been excluded from the systems of production of pop culture, and particularly from cinema. So in other words, you will not have black filmmakers by the turn of the century. Of course, cinema was not yet the most important constituent of popular culture. No, it was theater, and even in theater, we have in the minstrel the fabrication of blacks as something that can be enjoyed, but as something that doesn't produce that specific form of enjoyment that one calls, popular culture. In that respect, it is important to mention, a couple of categories in theater. The minstrel, I've said, the blackface, those kinds of things that are inventions of the turn of the century in the U.S. Casting, the black as, the black subject as something that is a spectator, that is not a producer of pop culture. There's one film that is very important in that constellation. It is the film The Birth of a Nation by Griffith, 1915. So when you go on Blackboard, you will have The Birth of a Nation, 1915. I've posted it there under the title for today. I have The Birth of a Nation there, so you can have a look. So a very racist film, amazingly racist. I've never imagined that film as racist could be produced. And of course, even in 1915, it unleashed so much passion. It divided the United States. It's a very ugly film. So because it was so divisive, because it was such an attack against black people, it awakened those spectators that were black, or the blacks that were spectators. It awakened them and transformed them into actors. So the turning point, I would say, as far as black activism in popular culture is concerned, will be, the birth of a nation, without any doubt, because it unleashed so much hatred against black people that no black person, even today, can watch that film and remain indifferent. But what is also important about the birth of a nation is that it uses most of the techniques of Hollywood. It uses most of the techniques of Hollywood, many of which are still used today. One of those techniques is, of course, melodrama. I chose the film. I chose, the film Apocalypse Now for us to see how Hollywood still functions on the basis of melodrama. So the use of emotions, number one, conflict of emotions, characters as construct of emotions, the constitution of conflict based on psychology, and etc., etc. So melodrama as the basic point of Hollywood. So that is a formula which finds its most vivid expression, of course, in The Birth of a Nation. One can continue with the opposition between the good and the evil. So, and of course, the castigating of black people as the evil. So they're not only spectators, they are now transformed from spectators into evil. So something that one can dispose of. And so it is, you can see the continuity between that and Apocalypse Now, the Vietnamese. And if you talk about Apocalypse Now, in between, you have to find, to establish our, the book that we read, Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness, where blackness is castigated as something bad, as something that is disposed of, exterminate those brutes. And you see that in Apocalypse Now. So the character of the Vietnamese, they are shot at, they are killed, and you have their heads everywhere. So the total this humanization of blackness, of the other, the transformation of blackness into the other, etc. We'll have to go back to The Birth of a Nation. We have to go back to The Birth of a Nation. And of course, at the basis of that is colonialism, is slavery, a structure of power that will bring us back to, slavery and to colonialism. So, in other words, the transformation of blacks into viewers, so people with agency, people who move from being simply spectators, so subjects without agency, into subjects with agency, will have to count with the film The Birth of a Nation by Griffith. Griffith is actually the founder of Hollywood. He's the founder of Hollywood. He established a relation between Hollywood and power, between Hollywood and racism, and between Hollywood and the othering of non-white American citizens, and particularly the relation between Hollywood and the KKK. So the constitution of the hero in the film as white, and the black as the racist, rapist, etc., etc. So you have that the structure of narration that The Birth of a Nation presents is duplicated in Apocalypse Now, even if it is a different time, it's the 70s, even if Apocalypse Now is a critique of the Vietnam War, even if Apocalypse Now is made by a filmmaker whose consciousness is based on the left, when the consciousness of Griffith was basically based on the far right. The structure that Hollywood uses is enshrined in The Birth of a Nation, and therefore I take that film as the film through which one can see the turning point, the appearance of blacks as viewers. So the appearance of blacks as viewers is not only, marked through the fact that they were excluded. So you had the segregated theater halls, etc., etc. But the appearance as viewers is marked by the name of one person whose name who Oscar Michaud. Oscar Michaud is the first black filmmaker. Oscar Michaud is the person who actually in single-handedly created black cinema and created a genre that one calls race films. So Oscar Michaud actually carries race films with him. Uh, and his first shot was the film Body and Soul. Body and Soul is a film that he made in 1925. Body and Soul is the story in which Paul Robeson, the first black star, appears. Body and Soul is the film about a pastor who has very little scruples and who lives off the money of his constituency and who is caught along the way, because he rapes the girl of um, uh, one of the ladies who comes to his church. So, Body and Soul is a landmark in African American and Black cinema because it is a response to the birth of a nation. So, it is impossible even today to talk about the birth of a nation without mentioning Oscar Michaud's Body and Soul and without taking Body and Soul into consideration because until now those two films speak to each other. If the birth of a nation, is racially marked, Body and Soul is also racially marked, but differently. If the birth of a nation is a landmark of Hollywood, Body and Soul is not. It is the first independent film that was made in the U.S. Independent in the sense that it was funded by Oscar Michaud himself. He gambled and he wrote books. He made some money, and now he could finance that film. A formula that will be used later on by films, for instance, of blaxploitation, etc. So he counted on the black public to watch the film. So, and he also counted on an alternative distribution system. So the black churches, particularly to screen that film for him to be able to make money and make another one. So Oscar Michaud made a couple of films before going bankrupt himself based on that system, using the tools of cinema, using the distribution system of the black community to be able to propel a story that presents blackness under a different light, under its own light. But the other thing is that when you watch Body and Soul, and I posted it on Blackboard too, you will see that he tapped into the discourse of blackness that was ideologically composed during his time. So you see on the in the house where his characters appear, it's not only the fact that the film basically plays in the black church, so and uses all tools of the black church and uses the main character of the black community who is the pastor. He goes further. He taps into characters like Lincoln, certainly, who was I don't need to present Lincoln anymore, but at least Frederick Douglass appears and Booker T. Washington to make sure that his film used the references of black discourse to establish something I called agency. The agency of blackness in that film is not something that is psychological, it's something that is intellectual. So he responds to the melodrama of the birth of a nation with an intellectualism and an organized community. So blackness is therefore has an agency because it is intellectual, and secondly because it has an organization. because it is organized. So that is the way through which he composes a black agency in response to the racism of the birth of a nation, racism that feeds, that nourishes itself from melodrama, from pure melodrama, and establishing a formula, a Hollywood formula that survives in films like I said, Apocalypse Now. Any blockbuster of Hollywood, anyway, uses melodrama, so that without any doubt. So, but the third thing that he did was to uh, use the most important um, stars, black stars of his time, and in that respect, he used Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson, as the most important, performer of his time, appears in that film. In that's the first film in which Paul Robeson appears. So we have three things that Oscar Michaud does to underline Black agency. The first is that it is intellectual, so it is not melodrama. The second is that it is organized. It is organized. The third is that it taps into the stardom of the Black community with Paul Robeson. So, having said that, you can see one has moved away from a Black spectator to a Black actor. So, that activism of Blackness is again based, I was saying, on number one, intellectualism. It is intellectual. So, Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass, etc. It is totally intellectual. Number two, it is organized, so the Black church, the Black community, etc. And number three, the Black Star, Paul Robeson is at the center of that. It is something that hasn't changed until today. So the constitution of Black activism based on that is important. So you have a response that taps into Black activism. You have a response that taps into what Blackness has to offer at best, right? So the shift from spectatorship to activism is therefore marked. So one can go from there and have a couple of other examples. So I could have taken, we talked about it in class, I could have taken Josephine Baker. I posted a link to her career, a documentary that presents her career. Josephine Baker will not follow the specific example of Paul Robeson appearing in an independent film. No, she went to Paris and there became the first international star by appearing in the Folie Bergère, so mainstream Paris theater, but outside of the United States. That's another route, a route that will be used by many, Black writers, Richard Wright, James Baldwin, or even singers, for instance, Jimi Hendrix going to London, to start a career, etc., etc., etc. So that is another route. And Paul Robeson himself, after Body and Soul, he went to London. That is from London that he appeared in major blockbusters, King Solomon's Mine, etc., etc. So the constitution of Black agency as part of popular culture, that what we are talking about here is popular culture. The constitution of Black agency as part of popular culture is not an elaboration. It has many chapters, it has many characters, but it is structured. It is structured around the three things I mentioned before, which is on the one hand, it is intellectual, so it is thought through as a response. It is understood as a response against the attack against the brutal, the violence of popular culture, of white popular culture, of Hollywood, etc. And number two, it taps into a system of organization that one can call, the Black community. And number three, it propels or uses Black stars, to make it possible for a spectatorship for a Black spectatorship to activate itself and support the cultural productions that we are talking about. When you look at what I posted on Blackboard, you will see a couple of films that shots of 1959 in Nigeria, where you can see dance moves. In a way of saying that, even when one talks about Black popular culture, when one talks about response of Blacks in popular culture, it is very difficult to disconnect it from what um, uh, has been done on the African continent, be it in terms of dance moves, be it in terms of religiosity, because of course it is impossible to think about body and soul without the fact that it used the church, and the Baptist Church is rooted in some of the practices that are totally communal on the African continent, and were transported to the Caribbean, to the US, to Latin America by slavery. So voodoo is one of those, and um, certainly, and those dance moves make us remember that the commutation of Black culture in general is a reminder of the presence of the Black Atlantic in at the center of what one can call, Black expressive cultures. So the response, the transformation of the Black spectator into an actor is in itself already, without any doubt, a response to the deep call from the African continent itself. It is a response, to what, has been happening on the African continent in terms of a Black expression, in terms of expression, tribal expression, if you want, in terms of religiosity, in terms of Black, performing arts, etc., etc. So those two videos make us remember that the transformation of the Black spectator into a viewer, and of course into an actor, taps into something that's deeper than simply presenting something for a show, taps into a large religious, cultural backbone of the African continent. So, having said that, I will conclude by underlining the fact that that is the here is the a generic presentation of what Blacks, the African continent, does in transforming the Black spectator into an actor. But of course, that one can also be organized and has been organized, because then one will have to move from spectator to viewer, not only, but also from viewer to audience. Right? The audience is not only a spectator who has agency, it is now, a multitude of such spectators. So one can talk about Black audiences, and therefore you have films that are made specifically for Black audiences to be able to tap into that agency, to that system of organization, to be able to tap into that stardom, to be able to tap into that intellectual reflection, that intellectual discourse, to be able to use it to compose cinema. So films for Blacks will continue along the line that was established by Oscar Michaud, with his race films. So until today, you have films for Blacks. So of course, you have many definitions of films for Blacks, some of which will be very ugly, for instance, in South Africa or during colonial times. But nobody can dispute the fact that the first focus grouping of cinema, and particularly the targeting of specific communities through film, is something that the industry continues to do. The bottom line is the following: it is that when one talks about the audience, one doesn't only look into or look at the agency of the Black spectator, or the fact that such a spectator has been transformed into a viewer. One looks now into the fact that that a multiplicity of such viewers composes something very enthralling, something that actually has money, something that can afford to finance cinema, to finance the film, to finance filmmakers, and to finance actors by paying a ticket and by going to watch that. So the touchstone of what I'm saying is that we are having now a Black flaneur. We're having a Black flaneur. So we've moved from a white flaneur to now a Black flaneur. We have a black consumer. We have a black fellow who, in major cities, be it Chicago, be it London, be it Paris, be it in Africa, Nigeria, in Lagos, Cape Town, etc., can dictate the taste of the time, can actually define what is enjoyable and what's not, can put a stamp on what cultural productions can be and should be, and can actually define culture, popular culture in general, which is what's happening now. We had a session on that. I'm going to touch down on the last thing that one can also underline is the gaze, the black gaze, as opposed to the racial gaze of the birth of a nation. Now the black gaze that has a specific orientation, has a specific view, has a specific organization, has a specific structure. The black gaze, as one can say, also the male gaze or the female gaze, because the gaze is generalized, is raised, it's organized, on class. But here, the black gaze as something that is the backbone of the constitution of blackness as consumer. Right? It is a structural evolution from where we were at the very beginning, where blacks were spectators. Now we see that they are flaneurs, that they are consumers, that they buy, that they contribute, that they have expectations, and of course that they profit, etc., etc. So they are part of the capitalism in which they appeared at the beginning as customers. Now they are the ones dictating the terms of that form of circulation of goods, etc., etc. So that is what I wanted us to talk about today, going from cinema to see that the activation of the black spectator, the transformation of the spectator into a viewer, and the multiplicity of it to compose an audience, is, by the turn of the century, of the 20th century, I wanted to say, is one phenomenon that one will have to look into, because of course it is the backbone of the new form of politics that will appear during those years, because the black audience as an agency in the production of culture is a political entity, it's a political subject that defines what it means to do politics along the way. So we'll come back to it next time, and we'll address how it composes its own, it vocalizes its own views in criticism, etc. But for the moment, I want us to stop here, and thank you very much if you listen to this. It is unfortunate that we don't see each other, that we talk to each other through a distant form of learning and of teaching, but it doesn't matter. I wish you the best during your break. I wish you, the best, and remain healthy. I said already that I will be sending you that I'm expecting you to send me a short summary of the text. Negroes laughing at themselves. I'm expecting you to do that, and I'm going to be sending you the prompts for your midterm, because we'll do midterms in a regular fashion. So I'm going to be sending you that as well. And if you have any questions, please react, send me an email. I'll react promptly. And if you have any thing that you do not understand, it's obvious, please send me a note. I'm going to stop here, and I thank you again. I thank you very much. Thank you, and bye-bye.